Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today I am actually talking to another podcast host, which is amazing for me. Katie is the host of Everyday Happiness, Finding Harmony and Bliss. She's also an author and many other things that I'm sure we will touch on while we get having our conversation today. But Katie, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time, especially with as busy as you are. So for people who maybe don't know who you are or don't know any of the podcasts and the books and all the other things, do you want to give yourself a brief introduction?
Sure. Well, I am just going to tell you what I'm doing right now because I think that's really what's lighting my hair on fire. And we can get into how I've been chasing happiness, which is I love your podcast title. It's so much fun. So I am a happiness expert. I'm a consultant. I work with companies on how to grow belonging and company culture. I host an every single day podcast. 3 minutes or less. I usually try to say like 2-ish minutes, but it's almost always 3 minutes, like close to 3, on happiness science. As a recovering lawyer, I just couldn't get behind how to improve my happiness without digging into the science. So happiness science and my concept, intentional margins, like how we just can take a deep breath and get off that hamster wheel that we all feel at times. And then I have a product line that I am obsessed with, called kindness cards, and there are postcards and greeting cards and it's all about spreading kindness, this idea that kindness is contagious. And when I was looking for cards to send to people, I couldn't find anything that didn't have like hearts and flowers and all the things that we love, but maybe a little bit of sparkle, but a little bit more sophisticated. So I created my own, and it's so much fun. And there's literally science around how it boosts happiness. And when the world feels like a dumpster fire, doesn't it feel like a little boost of happiness would just be so delightful?
Yes. And this is part of the reason why I love you. And I was so excited to have you on the podcast because I am very much having the education that I have very much into the science of all of the happiness things. And the world is chaotic and it is so busy. And things, I think, especially over the last 3 to 6 months, given the last few years that we've all had, have just been so stressful for people as they try to figure out how to move forward and what that looks like and what changes they want to make in their life and all the other things. And I feel like we're kind of in a place where people are trying to focus on themselves, but at the same time, also very much aware that we are living in a world that's very much becoming it's all about me kind of society. So this idea of spreading joy and happiness and kindness and love is just so heartwarming to me. So for everyone listening, I will, of course, put links to all of the things so that you can follow Katie, you can find the cards, you can do all the things in the show notes for this episode. But Katie, for people who are listening, like, you have a very interesting path that sort of led you here. Most people don't end up in a space where they're researching happiness or where they're looking for how that unfolds in the world. So what was really the catalyst for you for this life change?
Yeah, I stopped practicing law when my first child was born, and we won't go into getting to that space, but in like 10 seconds or less. I grew up in a town of 2006 people in the middle of a cornfield in Minnesota, decided that I wanted something different. It was very much like means to an end, fight or flight, all of those things that we have experienced at different times. Different people experience these kind of emotions. And I decided I was on the straight and narrow path to be a lawyer. So I thought that was going to be my ticket out. And so I did that, moved to Washington, D.C., where I was a federal court trial attorney for a number of years, had a baby, decided, oh my gosh, this isn't the life I want anymore, and kind of blew it all up. And I always thought that being a lawyer was all I ever wanted to do. It was my purpose. It was my life stream. It was what filled my cup. But what I discovered was that it was really just a means to an end. It was really just the vehicle for me, and it wasn't the passion. And so I spent some time over the next dozen years doing all kinds of like fun entrepreneurial things that were just so stinking exciting. And then we had this little thing we call the COVID pandemic. And during that time, I've always been glasses half full, synthetic happiness, all of the things. That's just part of
Sure.
who I am. But what I found myself doing, maybe you can relate to this. I'm sure some of your listeners can relate to this. I found myself watching all of the press conferences every single day about what was happening. I found myself really obsessed with things I could not change, feeling
Mm,
very uncertain and feeling a lot
sure.
of anxiety around the uncertainty of what COVID was in the very early days.
Beginning, yeah.
And I really started going on social media and doom scrolling how bad it could be. I don't know if anybody has ever done that before, whether it was the start of the pandemic or something else. I found myself just in a spiral of like, oh my gosh, the world is a dumpster fire and there's nothing I can do about it. And I have these kids and I'm like trying to mama bear all the things and
Right.
do virtual school. And uh, there's lots of parts of those early days that I really did appreciate. And it was centering, but at times, but also felt very anxiety producing. And I decided one morning, a couple months in, that I was going to figure out how to get out of this. Like, this wasn't a good space for me mentally. And
Sure.
I started diving into happiness, like obsessively. And, went back to my law school roots where I just couldn't help myself. And I was reading every scientific article and really trying to figure it all out. And what I found was that there are certain things that you can do that will boost your happiness. And there are certain parts of happiness that are actually within our control.
Right.
And I discovered that I could regain control by focusing on the small actions that mattered most. And I started telling all of my friends because we were all doing like those Zoom happy hours and those Zoom coffee chats
Awesome.
all the time. And I was like, you got to do this. You got to do this. I'm learning, whatever. And somebody had said to me, you should do a podcast and share this with people. And that's literally how it started, out of so much fear and trying to flip the script for myself. I just decided to start doing it. And then it's been so much fun that I just haven't stopped.
I absolutely love that, speaking from experience, because I started my podcast very similarly. Someone said, you need to have a podcast. And so I started one, and we're like 7.5 years in, and it's still fun. So I can completely relate to that part of your story. I love the fact that for you, this ultimately became a way of sort of gaining control of the things you could control, because so often we are constantly fighting this battle of, I am surrounded by all of this stuff that is happening, good, bad, or ugly, and I need to fix it. But 90% of it we can't fix. We have no control over. And we're so focused on that stuff that we forget about the things we can control, the little things that might make a difference in our day, whether that's waking up and meditating, whether that's smiling at somebody as you hold the door for them at a shopping mall, the little things that we can do that do change the course of how you feel in the moment, which ultimately does add to your happiness and reduce your stress levels. Those are huge things. And so many people just sort of leave those on the back burner.
Yeah, it's really a shame, if you think about it, how we've, decided as a society that the hustle culture and all of that is worth it, and that it's glamorized and it's, like the busy badge, right? Like
Right.
we all know that. But there is this idea that you can still be busy and be balanced. You can still be kind and be busy. You can still create your own happiness, right? In fact, I think that we have an obligation. I think we have a responsibility as a human race to find happiness wherever we can. And I don't think that decreases our compassion for what's happening in the world around us. So
Yes.
the world can be a dumpster fire. There are things happening. We have global warming. We have a pandemic.
Right.
We are in a season where there's illness. We have a war in Ukraine, right? There are
Yeah.
things happening, and we can have compassion for all of that, but that does not decrease our responsibility or our own compassion for finding happiness. Like, we can have
Yes.
both. And I think sometimes if we're just talking about happiness and we're talking about how, like we should do all these things, it's not that it's insensitive or that we don't also think, there's bad things happening in the world. You can only do so much. Like
Right.
babies are hungry in parts of the world.
Sure.
We can do lots of things to help that. And we can still wake up and choose happiness. There could be something going on emotionally. There could be a tragedy in your family. You can still, it's so hard, but you can do it. You can wake up and you can choose to find a glimmer of joy, happiness, hope, whatever that is. You get that. You get that as a human. You get to do that.
Yes. And I think often we forget because we are in this hustle culture. We are in this constantly be moving culture. We forget to just stop and sort of appreciate some of those small things that do give us that moment, right? Like something as simple as making a cup of coffee in the morning has become such a thing that everyone does on autopilot versus I am blessed to have this 30 seconds where my kids are still asleep, where I can peacefully make a cup of coffee and just enjoy it to wake up my morning. Like those little things, even in the middle of stress and emotions and all of the chaos around us, those little things are the things that ultimately add up to all of the joy and all of the happiness and creating the life that we want. We just tend to power through those because we're so busy getting to whatever the next thing is that we're supposed to be working towards.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, there's some science around this idea of savoring, which is really spending time in your moment, right? So whether it's smelling the coffee, so I love coffee. It's like one of my most favorite things in the world. And like how that warm cup feels like going down your throat, like there's like the smell, like all the warmth of the coffee mug. There's all of these senses. It could be going for a walk and looking at the leaves and smelling the fresh air, feeling, the wind blow, whatever. But this idea of savoring actually is one of the components that, there's lots of things you can do to boost happiness. I call it like a happiness soup. Like you got to choose what works for you. But one is savoring, just like you mentioned. And it absolutely works. It gives you this chemical release, the serotonin and dopamine and all the things that make us feel good.
Yes. And ultimately, that's what we're all searching for, right? I was having a conversation with someone when the pandemic first started, because here in Canada, we had a really large increase in drug and alcohol use during the first few months of the pandemic. And it was because people were trying to numb, but they were also just trying to feel good in the middle of all of this craziness, right? And people forget we have the ability, based on what we do throughout the course of our day, what we eat, how we exercise, what we choose to focus on. We can control some of that. We can have some of that dopamine. We can have some of those feel-good chemicals throughout the course of our day by going for a walk. Maybe you're spending the day in the park reading a book rather than, on your computer playing on Facebook, whatever the difference happens to be. You can make some choices throughout the course of your regular day that do add to your happiness, that do help create that feel good sensation in your brain and in your body. And then that leads you to wanting more of it and doing more of those really good things for yourself.
Absolutely. 100%. So most of the scientists will, like the thought leaders in this area will agree loosely that happiness is about 50% genetics, 25% circumstantial, and then 25% what's in your control. So part of it is just genetics. Like we can't really change that. And part of it's circumstantial, like things happen, right?
Sure.
And, it can be lots of different things. Now, there is some science around this idea that it doesn't really matter. Like circumstances isn't about money or like wealth or, that kind of thing, because there's lots of happy people in this world that have no wealth, right?
Yes.
But, so circumstances, you can make an argument about how that really shakes out.
Sure.
But there is at least 25% that's in your control. And friends, that's a big number when you're talking about how to change your brain. Like that's massive. And that's so exciting because we actually get to contribute to how we show up and how we feel.
Right. Which is such a big thing. And I think especially given the last few years. I think we all sort of live in a society right now that is all or nothing. And we stopped focusing at some point on here's 5% of a difference in your life. Here's 25, here's 15, whatever it happens to be, because it's not all or nothing. People are like, oh, that's not worth my time or energy. But that 5%, that 10% can make such a huge difference in your life overall and lead to larger percentages down the road.
100%. I mean, you get happiness by having good happiness habits. Like they're always small. Like that's just what it is. Like true fulfilled happiness. Like not just emotional happiness, like, yay, I got the great parking spot, right?
Right.
But like true fulfilled happiness, that happens over creating habits that compound over time. And the thing is like if you're chasing happiness on the other side of whatever the accomplishment is, you're never going to get there. The bigger house, the new job, if you're flipping the coin to get to the next thing, you're never going to get there. That's not how this works. It's just like literally scientifically proven it will not work. There's this theory called hedonic adaptation that talks about the hedonic treadmill, how you just never get there. You buy a new car, the new car smell, and then a week later, the new car doesn't smell the same. Like it's just the way it is, right? But happiness, like if we're really breaking it down, happiness is really two prongs, right? And I'm sure that you like think about this stuff all the time. So I'm certainly not telling you anything you don't know, but maybe your listeners will be like, aha. So there's two prongs. The first prong is this like happiness emotion, right? This feeling, of joy, elatement, this idea that you have this like positive feeling, right? I got a great parking spot at the mall. Yay. But the second prong is where all the magic is. And I think sometimes we forget that happiness isn't always like glitter, sunshines, and rainbows.
Right.
So the second prong is satisfaction and purpose. And you need both of these prongs. You need the emotion and the satisfaction and purpose to have well-rounded happiness. So all that kind of stuff. But purpose is so fun. It's how you feel when you're doing the thing you love. So that could be knitting, that could be volunteering, that could be caring for the children, that could be your job, that could be doing a podcast, that could be writing, that could be going to coffee. Yes, right? Purpose. And it's so interesting because that's really like the ancient Greeks did this. They said this thousands of years ago. They said happiness was basically the joy we feel while striving for our potential. Right? This has like been known forever. The joy we feel while striving for our potential. So it goes into that purpose, like what lights our hair on fire? What do we get to do?
Right.
And then where I think a lot of people get caught up, especially here in America, but I'm sure it happens all over, is that this satisfaction piece. I was just saying like this hedonic treadmill, this like new car smell wears off. Well, that's where satisfaction really comes in, because satisfaction is wanting what you have more than what you want. Right? So it's wanting what you have, what you want to appreciate what you have more than you want to pine for what you want. So we think that we'll be more happy and more satisfied when we get all the things. But the fact is, long-term fulfilled happiness doesn't work that way.
Right.
It just doesn't. It's just will not work. Our bodies, our mind, like the neurons, the way that everything connects in your head, it's impossible. It's impossible. So it's like an equation. You want to appreciate what you have more than you pine for what you want. That doesn't mean you don't want stuff. You want to go on a trip, you want to buy a yacht, whatever. I'll tell you from the research, buying the yacht just gives you bigger problems, because then you're wondering where to park it. And then you're wondering what
and all the other things
and how you're going to like whatever. Like people that do that are never in fulfilled happiness. You think that it's going to be great, but it's probably not as great as you think, because we can't, estimate that, because our brains don't work that way.
Well, and I think that's the thing people forget, right? Or people are unaware of, because we live in the society that we do. So I'm so glad that you mentioned it today. And typically at the end of the podcast, I will ask people some questions, but really there's only one question I want to ask you because we are specifically talking about happiness. In this moment, for me, happiness is constantly changing given my life. And for most people, I think that's true. So right now, how would you define happiness?
I absolutely believe that happiness stems from the joy we feel while striving for our potential. I just think that that's where it's at. I think when we're doing things that we love, when we're spending time in our core values, when we're following our North Star, when we're identifying our priorities and living those out, that's where happiness is, because happiness is clarity and contentment and purpose and satisfaction and belonging and feeling nurtured and nurturing, right? It's all of this, beautiful soup, so to speak. And I think it only happens when we're striving for our potential. I think the ancient Greeks got it right. And I don't know. I mean, other people have said the same thing. Sean Acor, he's written happiness books. You can look him up on TED Talk or YouTube or wherever. He says basically the same thing, but he attributes it back to the very beginning. And there's just nothing better than that. There's just nothing better than feeling like you're in it, and it's not a grind.
Yes, it not being a grind, I think, is such a huge thing because we unfortunately live in this society that teaches us it has to be a grind, and that's just not true. So I love that you have come on today to talk about this, Katie, and I am happy to have you back anytime. I do want to be respectful of your time because I know you have somewhere else you need to be. But anytime you want to come back and talk more about all of this, I am happy to have you back because you are amazing. And I just love this topic. As you are well aware, we are both like peas in a pod for this. So thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else you want to say before I let you go today?
I just want to remind people that kindness is contagious and that you get to influence the little bubble around you, and those little bubbles grow, whether you see it or not. It happens. There is something in our brains that makes sure that it does. And if you can go out there and sprinkle a little bit of kindness today, it will make a difference.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And it is such a simple thing that I think, especially over the last few years, we've forgotten about, right? Because people have been masked and people have been worried and, holding a door for someone, smiling at a cashier, saying hello as you walk into a store that has a greeter. Like all of those things are such little things, but they go so far to making people see not just that the world is a good place, not just that there are nice people in the world, but like they have value as a human being, making eye contact, all of the little things. It's so important to make people realize that they're not alone in the world, but also make you feel good because you've made someone else feel good. And all of that matters. So thank you so much, Katie. Like I said, I could keep talking forever, but I promise I won't. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And for everyone listening, I will, of course, post in the show notes the website, the social media, all the fun things so that you can follow Katie. You can listen to her podcast because it is only just a few snippets every morning to get you going. And it's important for us to have something that helps give us the fuel that we need on the days when we struggle or we have a hard time. So thank you so much, Katie. I appreciate you, and I'm happy to have you back anytime.
Thanks so much.
Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for listening.